So we're live. We're going to start out with the first unit looking at financial math. And we start out, whenever we start explaining finances, we always start with something called simple interest. Now, simple interest is not used anywhere, but everything that is used is built up on the concept of simple interest and then making it more complicated and charging you more money because simple interest isn't charging you enough money to borrow. What is interest when we talk about finances? You've heard the term, I hope. They talk about interest on loans. What do we mean by the interest? What does that describe? Certainly doesn't describe this class. Interest. No, come on. What is it? Yeah, sure. Seb. When a bank charges you interest, what does that mean? Sure. It isn't just if they charge you money if you don't pay on time. They charge you money for the privilege of borrowing. If you borrow, for example, $10,000, even if you pay it on time, you'll end up probably paying back about $14,000. That's how banks work. There's a reason, by the way, that banks have nice buildings. And if you check the big 4 or 5 national banks and you see their profits every year, they're in the hundreds of millions and sometimes in the billions of dollars. They make a lot of money on interest. And the longer your loan, the more you pay. The big one, of course, is the mortgage. People borrow money to buy a house for 25 or 30 years. If you borrow, for example, $200,000, over the 25 years, you'll probably end up paying back about $280,000 interest. And that's making every payment and not paying any late fees. So it has actually nothing to do with late fees. Credit cards will charge you interest if you're late. And that's one area where because credit cards don't charge interest unless you're late, most credit cards. So how do they calculate it? Well, it starts with simple interest, but nobody calculates that. We always start there, though. So I wrote here, simple interest is the amount of interest earned on an investment or paid on a loan. Interest is bad when you're borrowing. It's great when you're investing. Although usually when it's an investment, instead of calling it interest, we call it return. You say, what was your return on your investment? Oh, I got 8% back. That's pretty good in this economy right now. 12 years ago when the economy was going really crazy during that whole tech bubble, 11 or 12% return was considered pretty good. 3 and 4 years ago when the whole world economy collapsed, 2 or 3% or not negative return was considered pretty good. So simple interest is the amount of interest earned on an investment or paid on a loan. And simple interest is based only on the original principal amount. Now, principal is a fancy word for the amount you start with, invested, and the simple interest rate. We're going to do some actually Math 8 percentages. Example 1. Suppose you invest $1,000 at a simple interest rate. All of us right now, we're going to underline the word simple interest because I'm going to be giving you different types of interest and you'll have to spot what type it is. So get in the habit of finding the word interest and looking right in front of it and saying, what kind? Really the two we're going to be looking here are simple and compound. The rate is 5%. Let's underline that. That's important. And then it says per annum. Does anybody know what does per annum mean? It's the financial term for per year. It comes from the word annually, from the same Latin word that annual comes from. So in financial terms, you'll talk about your loan running per annum. Okay? For 5 years, how much will investment be worth at the end of the 5 years? We're going to start out using a chart going step by step, and then we're going to try and find equations and shortcuts. Everybody got it? So, here's our chart. And this is why, by the way, we use computers for financial math because they can do this really, really fast. But the graphing calculators have some of this built in that I'll be loaning you guys too. I'll look at the quick headings. I see value of the investment at the start of the year. I see the simple interest earned each year, the accumulated interest, and the value at the end. Okay, what are we starting with according to this question? $1,000. You know what? Let's write $1,000 right here. We feel better. Our question is no longer blank. The interest rate is 5%. It's 5% of 1,000. How do I find 5% of 1,000? Well, I wrote it in brackets, and I'm kind of regretting that I did. I should have actually made you try and figure it out. To find, first of all, to do math with percentages, you couldn't actually do math with a percent. You have to first of all change it to a decimal. So what's 5% as a decimal? 0.05. What's 8% as a decimal? 0.08. What's 12% as a decimal? 0.12. What's 100% as a decimal? 1. 200%? 2. Okay. You divide by 100 or you move the decimal place over 2 spots. Most of you are kind of doing it in your head, and that's great. If it's complicated, feel free to divide by 100 on your calculator, but usually I try and do them in my head. So to find 5% or 6% or 7% of something, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply it by that percentage as a decimal. So 5% of 1,000 is going to be 0.05 times 1,000. I can do it in my head, but some of you are looking a little glassy-eyed, so you might go to your calculator and you would go 0.05 times 1,000 and $50. How much interest has accumulated so far? $50. We started out with $1,000. We earned $50. What's our investment worth now? In your head, $1,050. Now in year 2, our investment is worth $1,050. But simple interest always goes back to the first year. And this is why banks don't use this. Banks want to charge you as much as they can. Simple interest is going to say you're going to pay $50 or you're going to earn, in this case, $50 every single year, because that's what it was the first time we calculated it. In real life, if this was a loan, they charge you interest on the interest. So in real life, if you now owed $1,050, they would go 5% times $1,050, and that's what would go in this column, and that would make the next numbers bigger yet and bigger yet and bigger. That's why if you don't pay off your loan, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. But we're doing simple interest. So now it's going to be, we've earned $100 in interest. What's our investment worth now? $1,100. We now have $1,100 in the bank, but we're only earning $50 in interest because it's a simple interest. We have $150. It's now worth $1,000. Have we spotted the pattern? Yes? Woohoo! We have $1,150. It's going to give us $200 in interest. $1,200. And I think you end up in the bottom right corner with $1,250, yes? Okay. Rosanna, what did this question ask me? Can you read the last sentence in the statement above the chart?
From the above table we can get.
No.
Oh.
Up here, starting with the word how.
Oh, how much will your investment be worth at the end of 5 years?
What do they want me to find?
So,
What number were they wanting me to find?
the 1,250.
There's got to be a better way to find it than making a chart. Like, what if this was 12 years? Does that mean I got to do a 12-line chart? I got better things to do than that. So we're going to try and look for a pattern. What do you think? Simple interest isn't too bad. What was the interest every year? How much was the interest as an amount every single year? So for 5 years at $50, what would have been a shortcut to get that 250? And then just add that to my original total. For 8 years, I could have gone 0.5 times 50 times 1,000 times 8, and then added that to the original total. So 0.5, 0.05. For 14 years, I could have gone 0.05 times 1,000 times 14, and then added that to. Okay. That's why this is called simple interest. There's nothing too funky about it. It's straight multiplication. In fact, we can say this. as a formula, we say capital I equals capital P, lowercase r, lowercase t. That's the simple interest formula, and we're going to talk about what each letter means. What do you think the I in the simple interest formula stands for? Okay, so let's make a little note here. I equals the interest. What does P stand for? There is a word that begins with the letter P that appears earlier in the page, I think in my explanation of stuff. It's the fancy word for the amount you're starting with. Principal. Starting amount, although I abbreviated the word amount with a dollar sign because we're talking about money. By the way, I'm big on find an intelligent abbreviation and way to write stuff shorter. I'm great with that. You're going into university. If you try and write, most of you, if you try and write down everything your prof says, your arm will fall off. Learn some good shorthand that works for you. What does the lowercase r stand for? There is a word that begins with, I think there's a word that begins with R somewhere up there, four-letter word. Interest rate. Oh, let's make a little note though. As a decimal. If it's 8%, Roy, don't be multiplying by 8. You'll think you're getting rich, you're not. Or you'll think you're going broke, you're not, depending whether it's a loan or an investment. T is time. Oh, in years. That's if your interest rate is in years. If they gave you the interest rate in days, then please make sure your time is in days. If they gave you the interest rate in months, please make sure your time is in months. Make sure the units of time match. Sometimes we'll try and trick you and give you non-matching units, but most of the time here we'll keep it simple, stupid. I equals PRT. I equals PRT. Mr. Dewick, do we need to memorize this? I will give this to you, but you'll be looking this up so often, you may find that if you make the minimal effort to memorize it, it saves you having to look it up all the time in your homework. It'll drive you crazy. Okay. Next page. Other financial vocabulary. And this is useful. By the way, almost all of you are going to do one of two things. You're going to buy a house or a car or both. And usually, certainly for the house, unless you're far more well off than I realize, you'll be taking a loan out. And possibly for the car, you'll be taking a loan out. So you want to learn some of the vocabulary here. Does anybody know what we call the length of time of an investment or a loan? Begins with the letter T. And there's an E. Term. Oh, my writing is atrocious. It's actually gotten better. If you can't read what I've written, ask. That's the only thing. I will never make fun of you for asking, Mr. Dewick, what does that say? I'll always be embarrassed and just explain it because my writing is god-awful. It's also because it's kind of hard to write on the screen here and I'm a lefty, but still. What do we call the amount of money earned on an investment or paid on a loan? I already gave you that definition in that word. Begins with the letter I. Yeah, interest, what all of you are displaying right now. A lack of. Oh, sorry. Interest. Okay. A blank interest rate. This is an interest rate that's guaranteed not to change during the term of an investment or a loan. Begins with the letter F. Fixed. Yes, I mean, so many of you, you've heard this on the news or in a finance report or you're overhearing your parents, or maybe you already borrowed or invested some money. So a fixed interest rate is one that doesn't change. Sometimes that can be good. The interest rates right now are pretty low and have been for about 5 or 6 years. So many people have tried to lock in their house. They've tried to refinance their mortgage on a fixed interest rates. Sometimes it can be bad. You guys, what year were you all born? Okay. So I was born in 1969. I can remember, so I was about 11 years old in 1981. In 1980 and 81 and 82, interest rates to buy a house were 15 and 20%. It was ridiculous. The economy was terribly bad, and people, like now to buy a house, you're paying 3 and 4, maybe 8%. You're paying 12, 14, 15. It was very difficult to buy a house. And I can still remember, I think I was about 13. My dad, who was self-employed, he was a construction worker, came downstairs, sat down next to me, and he let out a deep sigh. I said, Dad, what's the deal? He said, Kelvin, I've just reached the point now where if I had stopped working for the past 4 years, done nothing, I'd be exactly where I am right now. Because the interest rates were so bad, their company had gone into so much debt, it had taken him all this time to work his way back to zero. Not to earning, but to zero. So sometimes fixed rates can be bad. Number 4, what did we call the original amount of money invested or loaned? Began with the letter P. Yeah, principal. You do need to know these terms. I will use them, and I may even ask you about them on a quiz or a test. The end date of an investment or loan. This is a word that begins with the letter M. This is a word that often teenagers display a lack of. Begins with the letter M, they display a lack of. Yep. Okay. When a loan matures, what you're saying is that's when everything's due. So a 25-year mortgage matures in 25 years. Yeah, they treat it like it gets old and becomes an adult. The same way, in theory, most of you are. In theory. Blank value, the amount, A, that an investment will be worth after a specified period of time. This is the future value. The future value. I can make this a bit bigger. Yeah, I can. And the last one is the rate of blank. This is the ratio of money earned or lost on an investment relative to the amount of money invested, usually expressed as a decimal or a percent. That's a very complicated definition. We'll practice that in a second. But rate of blank, because the letter R, you may have heard this term. Rate of return. See, you've heard these terms bandied about. Yep. Yep. Your mom's a mortgage broker? Oh, yeah, so you've heard a lot of this. Oh, and if people don't understand this, as we found out in 2008, you can drive the entire planet's economy into a disaster. Because people in the U.S. didn't understand this, and it started that whole mortgage banking crisis that then echoed its way into Europe, that then, I mean, it's important. Example 1. Marty invested in a $2,500 guaranteed investment certificate. They're called a GIC. A guaranteed investment certificate is a way to invest. You're guaranteed not to lose any money, but because you're guaranteed not to lose very money, you're not going to get a high rate of interest. Risky investments may give you 12 and 15 and 18% return, but you may lose everything. Guaranteed safe investments give you much smaller return, but you're not going to go back to zero. In fact, I told you the story of my dad, and I know that changed his thinking for the rest of his work time, and even now, he's 72 right now. He invests everything in term deposits that are guaranteed small returns. He's not going to take the risk of losing his savings anymore. He's not, even if that means he's passed up on some investments where people made lots and lots of money. He's just not going to do that. He's not going to go put himself through that risk anymore. So Marty invested $2,500, which you probably underline that. That's an important number. In a GIC at 2.5%, oh, what's the word in front of the word interest? Let's underline that so that when we learn more than one type, we can spot it. Paid annually, so let's make sure we're in years with a term of 10 years. Oh, we are in years, and years, we're good. How much interest will accumulate over the term of Marty's investment? Okay. Well, simple interest equals PRT. If this is a really, really complicated question, I may like list my data over here. I may say P equals, R equals, T equals. I think this one's not too bad, so I'm going to be a little sloppy. I think we can get it all from the question, what's the principal? Can you see it? 2,500. What's the rate? Don't say 2.5. It's not. 0.025, right? Way to handle the decimal inside the decimal, by the way. You surprised me. No, just kidding. Time, 10 years. And now this is what, grade 8 math, really. It's multiplying. The setup is a bit more different, but it's multiplying. I should be able to do this in my head. 0.025 times 10. Can I do this in my head, Mr. Dewick? Multiplying by 10, that would make that point. It's going to be 2,500 divided by 4. It's going to be 500 plus. Is it $625? Someone double check me. Woohoo! Come on, that was okay. Whatever. I'll impress you yet. That's the interest. B. What's the future value of his investment at maturity? I haven't given you a formula or an equation for there is one, but I usually just say, oh, I can figure it out. What was the principal? 2,500. What was the interest? What's the final value? What are we supposed to do with those numbers, do you think? Yeah, Adam. How about we'll use F for final value, and we'll write P plus I. In your homework, you don't have to write that. I tend to try and show more steps in my notes so that when you're studying, if you've forgotten something, oh, that's what we did. But I encourage you a little bit. Feel free to take some shortcuts in your homework. I think that's good. In fact, I think I can do this in my head as well. 3,125, yes? C says, use Marty's investment to write an algebraic expression that could be used to determine the future value of any investment earning simple interest. Now, I need to change my notation. It's traditional. Instead of using F for future value, they like to talk about that as the word amount. What would a good letter be to use to abbreviate the word amount? And conveniently, we can change this F to an A fairly easily by doing that. So can you change that F up there to a capital A? And it's going to be A equals principal plus interest, right? But we can do a bit more than that because we have an equation for interest. What was the equation on the previous page for interest? Oh, so you're saying the final amount is the principal plus PRIT? Oh! I see a letter that appears in both of those terms. Do you see it? We called that a greatest common factor. Called it a GCF. We can factor it out, and we'll have a 1 plus RT left behind. This is the way it's often written. Often they'll say your final amount is your principal times 1 plus RT. But I showed you where it came from, and I would argue, I was going to say, oh, Caitlin, I was going to be totally wrong. Good gosh. Caitlin, I would argue this version is easier for me to, I just go, it's what I started with plus what I earned. Duh. But okay, this is kind of nerdily cool. Hey, it's got brackets and factoring and fine. By the way, what was 100% as a decimal? See, what you're really saying is 100% of what you started with plus whatever else you earned times what you started with. So it kind of fits in with our percentages. Turn the page. So from example 1, we can see that the formula for the future value of an investment is, let's write it here, fancy schmancy. Final amount equals P plus I, or P plus PRT, or P bracket 1 plus ERT. By the way, when I do a lowercase t, I always put a little curve on it so you can tell it's not a plus sign. That's a plus sign. That's a lowercase t because it's got the little tail. Yep. All the same thing. That's why it's equals the same thing. Can be written as, can be written as, can be written as. Which one do I like the best? Well, I like that one. The math nerds like the one on the far right with brackets and factoring and you know. Okay. It also depends on what the question is asking. Some of these questions are easier to solve depending on how they're, well, you'll see. Example 2. Ingrid invested her summer earnings of $5,000 at 8% simple interest, paid annually. She intends to use the money in a few years to take a holiday with a girlfriend. A says, how long will it take for the future value of the investment to grow at $8,000? And B says, what is Ingrid's rate of return? This question looks a bit more difficult. This question, I'm going to list what they've told me. Because they're not just saying find the amount. When they say how long in part A, what are they asking me to find? What variable was how many years? Time. Okay, they're asking me to find t. That means I hope they've told me everything else. So let's start listing stuff. Roy, we're deficking, if you remember from Physics 11, right? There was a what? Whatever. What's that 5,000? Let's write down P equals 5,000. I've written something down. It's no longer blank. I feel better. What's that 8? Okay, but I'm going to write down 8. And what letter do I use for that one? R. It's the interest rate. I should have corrected you when you said the interest. It's the interest rate, 0.08. They want me to find t in part A, so I'll put t equals question mark. Oh, and they also gave me 8,000. What's that? So Brooke, going back to your question earlier, I think what I'm looking for of those various equations is the equation that has an A, a P, an R, and a T. But it better not have a capital I, because I don't have a capital I here anywhere. I think I want to use A equals this thing. Does that make sense? I think I want to use this. Final amount equals P bracket 1 plus RT. Sorry? The 1 is just a 1 because we said there is a greatest common factor of P right here. If I factor a P out of a letter P, what's left behind? When you factored an X out of an X, there was a 1 left behind. Remember your good old GCF stuff from Math 10 way back in the day? So if you factor out a letter P, then you have a 1, a plus, and the P would vanish there, RT. Yep. Okay. What are we trying to find? Okay. Let's plug everything else in. What's A? P? What's R? 0.08. And T is like the X from equation solving. I don't know. What does HOMK an abbreviation for, do you think? Homework? What's your homework? Go to my website, and if you haven't yet given me your contact information, pitmath.com, if you haven't clicked on that link and given me your email and all that, I want that for Monday. In fact, you know what? Probably this weekend I'll look at the list, and anyone that hasn't given it to me by Monday morning, I'll damage their self-esteem in some kind of clever, interesting, fun sort of a way. Okay? Now, my 2 new humans. I have a website, pitmath.com. Okay? PITTMATH.com. And you want to, first of all, let me pause this video.